Mom works at NASA, she announced. The classroom erupted in laughter, but it was swiftly silenced when a familiar face entered. It was a Tuesday afternoon, post-recess, the air filled with a faint mix of hand sanitizer and pencil shavings. Ms. Lawson had barely finished taking attendance when she declared, "All right, time for our What My Parent Does presentations." One by one, students shared their stories. A dad who was a firefighter, a mom who baked at a local bakery, even a brother in the army who, despite not being a parent, drew a round of applause. Then it was Talia Jefferson's turn. She rose slowly, clutching an index card with her name written in purple ink. Talia was known for her quiet intelligence, not one to speak unless spoken to. She scanned the room, made eye contact with no one in particular, and stated clearly, "My mom works at NASA." An instant hush fell over the class. Then the chuckles started, growing into waves of laughter that echoed through the room. "Wait, NASA?" A voice from the back questioned, disbelief evident. "Like, the space people?" someone else whispered, not quietly enough. Even Ms. Lawson seemed taken aback, her eyebrows lifting slightly in disbelief. Talia, however, remained composed. She didn't raise her voice or run. She simply stood there, calm and steady, and repeated, "Yes, she works at NASA." Talia's words, "She's a systems engineer," lingered in the air like an uninvited guest, clearly unwelcome in the minds of her classmates. Ms. Lawson, standing by the whiteboard, offered a tight smile that seemed to say, "Let's move on from this." "Thank you, Talia," she said, already flipping to the next name on her clipboard. "Next up, we have Owen." Talia sank back into her chair, the sniggers and nudges washing over her like an unwelcome tide. Her fingers found the hem of her shirt, twisting it nervously. Her face remained an impassive mask, but her ears burned with the heat of 1,000 suns. Owen began to drone on about his dad's plumbing business, but Talia barely registered a word. She knew they didn't believe her, not the kids, with their whispers and giggles, and certainly not Ms. Lawson, with her forced smiles and quick dismissals. It wasn't just the job title that seemed to defy their understanding. It was the person claiming it. Talia, with her deep brown skin, tight braids pulled back with a soft pink scrunchie, a hand-me-down backpack with a broken zipper, and well-worn shoes, didn't fit their image of a NASA employee. She didn't have the fancy words or the loud voice they expected. So, to them, her claim sounded like a child's fantasy, a tall tale spun from thin air. A piece of paper fluttered to her desk during Owen's presentation. Theo, the boy sitting next to her, leaned in and whispered, "Does she clean the bathrooms there or something?" Talia ignored him, her gaze fixed on the front of the classroom. She didn't cry, not then. But when the bell rang and the classroom erupted into a flurry of activity, Talia remained seated, her eyes locked onto the door. For the first time, she wished her mom had a different job. Something ordinary, something people wouldn't raise an eyebrow at. But even as she wished it, she knew it wasn't true. She believed, with every fiber of her being, that her mom's job mattered. Her mom had once told her, "Some truths are too big for small minds, Talia. You just let them catch up." With her head held high despite the tightness in her stomach, Talia walked out of that classroom. She wasn't embarrassed for herself. She was embarrassed for them. They had missed out on the chance to learn something incredible, something that could inspire them to reach for the stars. Little did she know, the lesson wasn't over, not for her classmates, and certainly not for Ms. Lawson. The Jefferson house stood near the edge of a quiet road in Mobile, Alabama. It was no mansion, but it was clean and well kept, with a small porch light that cast a warm glow into the gathering dusk. Inside, Talia's mom sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open, surrounded by stacks of papers. She looked up as Talia entered, her face breaking into a wide smile. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, pushing her glasses up her nose. "How was school?" Talia hesitated, then walked over and hugged her mom tightly. "It was interesting, Mom," she said, her voice muffled against her mom's shoulder. And as she told her mom about her day, she felt a spark of determination reignite within her. She wouldn't let their doubts and disbelief dim the light of her mom's achievements. She would let their small minds catch up, one day at a time. The house, A quaint affair, was painted a soft yellow, with green shutters framing the windows. It was the kind of place where the porch light flickered on well before the sun began its descent, and the screen door creaked a familiar tune whenever it was opened. Talia stepped through that door today at a slower pace than usual, her mind still heavy with the events of the day. She kicked off her sneakers, the familiar thud against the worn-out welcome mat grounding her, and tossed her backpack near the foot of the stairs before making her way to the kitchen. The aroma of garlic and onions wafting through the air told her that her mom had beaten her home, a rare occurrence. Dr. Renee Jefferson was standing at the stove, her back to the door, stirring something in a large, red pot. She didn't turn around immediately, her voice barely audible over the bubbling of the pot. "You're late," she stated, not with reproach but simply noting the fact. Talia pulled out a chair and sank into it, her shoulders slumping slightly. "Had to stay back to wipe down the desks," she muttered, her gaze fixed on the worn-out tablecloth. Renee turned, her eyes taking in her daughter's dejected posture. She lowered the heat on the stove, her voice soft yet firm. "Talk to me, Talia." Talia hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the sleeves of her hoodie. She looked like she wanted to speak, but didn't know where to begin. "They laughed, Mom," she finally blurted out, her voice barely above a whisper. Renee didn't need to ask who they were. She pulled out the chair across from Talia and sat down, her gaze steady and calm. "No, they didn't believe me," Talia continued, her voice gaining a little more conviction. "One kid even said maybe you cleaned the bathrooms or something." She looked up, her eyes meeting her mom's, expecting to see anger or disappointment. Instead, she found a quiet understanding. Renee took a deep breath, her expression thoughtful. "And what did you say back, Talia?" she asked, her voice steady and even. Talia looked down, her fingers tracing the pattern on the tablecloth. "I didn't say anything, Mom. Ms. Lawson just moved on to the next kid real fast, like she didn't want to deal with it." Renee's eyebrows twitched slightly at that, but her voice remained calm. "Do you believe you said anything wrong, Talia?" Talia looked up, her eyes wide with confusion. "No," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I didn't do anything wrong, did I?" Renee shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "No, you didn't. You told the truth, and that's all you can do. You can't control how others react to it. Their laughter and disbelief, that's on them, not on you." They sat in silence for a moment, the bubbling of the pot filling the void. Outside, a dog barked twice, its voice fading into the distance. Renee got up, stirring the food again, her voice thoughtful. "You know, when I first told people I wanted to work in aerospace, my high school guidance counselor told me to be more realistic, that I should consider secretarial work." Talia's eyes widened in shock. "That was in the 90s, Mom. Did it hurt?" Renee turned off the stove, facing her daughter again. "Yeah, it did. But it also lit a fire in me. I wasn't angry at her. I was determined not to let her decide who I could be. I stopped going to her office, and I found my own path." Talia smiled, a small, proud smile. "I like that, Mom. I like that you always find a way to talk real, but never dramatic." Renee grinned, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I could come to your class, you know. Parent days are this Friday, right?" Talia blinked, her eyes widening in surprise. "You do that, Mom?" Renee chuckled, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "I get the day off anyway, and it might be fun. I was thinking maybe I'd wear my NASA badge and that black blazer you hate." Talia's eyes lit up, her laughter filling the kitchen. "Okay, yeah, do that, Mom, please." Renee laughed too, a deep belly laugh that filled the room with warmth. "Thought so," she said, serving them both bowls of stew. As they ate, she told Talia stories about her first job interview and the time she accidentally spilled coffee on a flight simulator keyboard. The stories made Talia giggle, and she no longer felt small. She felt lucky to have a mom who was strong and wise and always found a way to make things better. "Remember, Talia," Renee said as they finished their meal, "you don't owe anyone proof, but if the moment comes when you feel like showing them, just know I've got your back." Talia nodded, her cheeks full of food and pride. "I know, Mom. I know you do." Friday arrived faster than Talia expected, the week passing in a blur of whispers and awkward apologies. By the time the morning bell rang, the classroom was buzzing with anticipation. Ms. Lawson had rearranged the desks into a horseshoe, making room for parents to sit and present. She wore a purple blouse and had put out a tray of sugar cookies, a half-hearted attempt to make the event feel festive. Talia sat near the middle, her backpack neatly tucked under her chair, her heart pounding with a nervous excitement. The first parents walked in around 9:15. A man in a mechanic's uniform, a woman in scrubs, a few moms with tote bags and Starbucks cups who smiled and waved a little too hard. The presentation started, filled with clapping and light laughter. One dad told a story about fixing a sink that exploded. Another mom talked about teaching yoga to toddlers. Talia kept glancing at the door, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, right as Ms. Lawson was introducing the next speaker, the door opened. Dr. Renee Jefferson stepped into the room, her presence commanding yet calm. She wore that black blazer Talia couldn't stand, tailored and crisp, her NASA ID badge hanging from a Navy lanyard that read, NASA, Johnson Space Center, Houston, Texas. She wore black slacks, no jewelry except for a silver watch, her expression calm, not smug, not flashy, just present. The room went quiet in a blink, the air seeming to still around her. Even the air conditioner seemed to hold its breath. Ms. Lawson stammered, her voice barely audible. And this is Dr. Renee Jefferson, Talia's mother, a systems engineer at NASA's Johnson Space Center. The room remained silent, the weight of Renee's presence filling every corner. Talia looked at her mom, her heart swelling with pride and love. She knew in that moment that everything was going to be all right. Talia rose from her seat, her voice steady yet soft. "This is my mom," she said, looking at Dr. Renee Jefferson standing tall and proud beside her. The teacher, Ms. Lawson, blinked in surprise, her lips parting slightly before she forced a smile. "Right. Welcome, Dr. Jefferson. Would you like to tell us about your work?" Renee nodded politely, her gaze scanning the room of curious faces. "Sure, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm an aerospace systems engineer at NASA. I work on designing systems that ensure astronauts can travel safely through space, from how they breathe to how data is transmitted back to Earth." A ripple of surprise washed over the room. Several students turned to look at Talia, their mouths agape. One boy whispered, "Whoa!" Renee, however, remained calm and collected, her voice clear and smooth as she continued. "I didn't come here to impress you, though," she said, her eyes meeting each student's gaze. "I came because my daughter told you what I do and some of you didn't believe her. I'm here to set the record straight." The room fell silent, the only sound the soft hum of the overhead lights. Talia's heart pounded in her chest, her palms growing damp as she gripped the edge of her desk. Renee stepped closer to the whiteboard, tapping on a printed diagram she'd brought. "You don't have to understand all of this," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. "But the next time someone tells you something that sounds too big to believe, take a moment before you react, because brilliance doesn't always come packaged in the way you expect." She turned to Talia, her eyes filled with pride. "And when someone tells the truth with pride, don't dismiss it. Let it stand tall." Ms. Lawson cleared her throat, breaking the spell. "Thank you, Dr. Jefferson. That was enlightening." Renee smiled, walking over to sit beside Talia, who was trying her best not to grin from ear to ear. The room seemed to move in slow motion after that. The next parent, a man who ran a car dealership, stumbled through his presentation, but no one laughed or whispered. And Talia, she sat up straighter than she ever had before, her chin held high, her eyes bright with newfound confidence. She didn't seek approval from her classmates. She didn't need it, because in that moment, her truth had been heard, loud and clear. But what most of them didn't know was that Renee's journey to NASA hadn't been an easy one. Before she was Dr. Renee Jefferson, she was just Renee Lewis, a lanky teenager with glasses too big for her face and notebooks full of diagrams that no one else in her neighborhood cared about. She grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in a house with a sagging front porch and a mother who worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. From a young age, Renee knew she was different. While other girls played jump rope, she built contraptions out of broken fans and old cassette players. Her uncle once called her odd, but she took it as a compliment, a testament to her unique perspective on the world. At 13, she picked up a book at the public library about space shuttles and read it cover to cover in one night. By 14, she was teaching herself basic programming, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she brought her ideas to life. She didn't talk much about her aspirations at school, having learned early on that saying, "I want to work at NASA," would either get her laughed at or ignored. Her teachers didn't push her, not because she wasn't smart. Renee had straight A's in every subject, but because they had already decided what she was likely to become. "You're really organized," one teacher told her. "You'd be great as a receptionist." When Renee mentioned applying to a summer program for young engineers at Georgia Tech, her math teacher raised his eyebrows. "That's pretty competitive," he said. "Are you sure you want to waste the application fee?" She applied anyway and got in, spending that summer surrounded by kids who thought like her, their notebooks filled with questions and curiosity without apology. She returned home with a folder of blueprints and a sense of direction, but college was another uphill climb. At Auburn University, Renee was one of only 3 black women in the entire engineering department. In group projects, she was always the one asked to take notes instead of solve equations. Professors mispronounced her name even after 3 semesters. But she didn't complain. She kept showing up, working nights at a diner near campus and tutoring high school students on weekends. There were times she thought about giving up, not because she couldn't handle the work, but because it was exhausting trying to prove she belonged. But she never did give up, and when she graduated, she ranked first in her department. After graduation, she interned at Lockheed Martin and then applied to NASA, a shot in the dark, she thought. But her resume spoke for itself, and she got the call while sitting in a laundromat with a basket of wet towels and one working dryer. Her mother cried on the phone for 5 whole minutes, and Renee knew she had made it. The real work was just beginning. The meetings, the designs, the late nights, the small stares in conference rooms, the moments where she had to repeat herself 3 times to be heard, Renee never stopped speaking up. Because every time she sat at a console or sketched a new idea, she remembered a younger version of herself who only needed one person to believe it was possible. And now, as she walked into her daughter's 5th grade classroom with that NASA badge swinging from her neck, she wasn't just representing herself. She was standing in for every girl who'd ever been told, "People like you don't do that." But this wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about planting something new in her daughter that couldn't be shaken. The following Monday, something was different. Not in a fireworks kind of way, just small shifts that only became noticeable if you looked closely. When Talia walked into class, she didn't expect a parade, and she didn't get one. But the air was quieter, the eyes didn't roll when she spoke, and Theo, the boy who had once laughed at her, avoided eye contact entirely. At recess, 2 girls, Kennedy and Samira, walked over to her near the jungle gym, standing around awkwardly, shifting their weight from one foot to the other. "Hey, Talia," Kennedy said softly, her eyes cast downwards. We were wondering, what's it like, having a mom who works at NASA?" Talia looked at them, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's pretty cool," she said, her voice steady and confident. "But you know what? It's not just about having a mom who works at NASA. It's about believing in yourself, too. Because if you believe in yourself, nothing can stop you from achieving your dreams." The 2 girls looked at her, their eyes wide with newfound admiration. And as they walked away, Talia knew that she had found her voice, her truth, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it away from her again. "My mom said your mom's speech was really something," Kennedy said, chewing her bottom lip. "She sounded smart, like really smart." "She is," Talia replied, without any hesitation. Samira nodded. "I looked up NASA stuff after school. It's kinda cool," that was all they said. But they didn't walk away right after. They stayed, and for the first time all year, the 3 of them sat on the bench and talked about something other than snack trades or slime videos. Later that day, Ms. Lawson pulled Talia aside as the class packed up for dismissal. "I wanted to say something," she began, voice lower than usual. "About last week," Talia looked up alert. I should have handled that moment differently, Ms. Lawson continued. I should have asked more questions, not moved on so fast. I'm sorry. Talia wasn't sure what to say. She wasn't used to adults apologizing like that. She nodded once, slowly. It was enough for now, but not everyone had a change of heart. Some kids still whispered, but they did it more carefully. A few looked at her like they were waiting for her to mess up, just to restore balance in their own heads. There was one boy, Dean, who muttered, "NASA kid," under his breath every time she walked by, as if trying to chip away at what she'd gained. Talia didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She just kept doing her work. She asked more questions in class now. She raised her hand even when she wasn't totally sure she was right, because now even getting something wrong didn't scare her, not like it used to. One afternoon during group work, she overheard a classmate say, "She thinks she's better than us." Talia looked up calmly and replied, "No, I just know I belong here." There was no argument after that. At home, Renee noticed the shift too. Talia talked more at dinner, shared little things about her day without having to be asked twice, and she started drawing again, not cartoons but diagrams, like her mother's, rockets, helmets, star maps in pencil. One evening, Renee found a post-it note stuck on the fridge. It read, "I'm going to work there too. Love, Talia." She didn't move it for 3 days, but this wasn't just about confidence. Something deeper had changed in Talia. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about standing in her own truth, knowing what was real, no matter who laughed. In gym class, when the teacher asked them to write down a goal unrelated to sports, Talia wrote, "Engineer, space missions, just like my mom." When the teacher read it out loud, no one laughed. They just listened. But back at home, something else was stirring. A quiet moment waiting between mother and daughter that would anchor everything they'd been through. It was Friday night again. A full week had passed since Parent Day, and the house smelled like Renee's famous lemon chicken. Talia was at the kitchen table sketching a new design, something about a rotating satellite that used solar panels shaped like flower petals. She didn't say much as she drew, just occasionally stopped to erase or squint at the angle. Renee watched from the sink, drying a dish slowly. The way her daughter concentrated, tongue pressed slightly against her upper lip, reminded her of herself at 12. Always building something inside her head. "You want to take a break?" Renee asked gently. Talia glanced up, almost done. Renee smiled and leaned against the counter. "You've been working on that for 2 hours. I know, I just want it to look right." She finished the last line and turned the paper toward her mom. Renee walked over and took a closer look. "Explain it to me." "Well, it's a satellite, but instead of keeping all the panels flat, they open up like this." She mimicked the shape with her hands, so it can collect more energy when it turns depending on the angle of the sun. Renee nodded, impressed. "That's smart. Where do you get that idea?" "I don't know. I was thinking about sunflowers earlier, how they move during the day. It just kind of came to me." Renee sat down beside her, placing the paper gently on the table. "You know what I love most about that idea?" she asked. "What?" "You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were just trying to solve a problem." Talia looked down at the drawing again. "Yeah, I guess I was." They sat there for a minute quietly, the kind of silence that doesn't need fixing. Then Talia spoke again, softer this time. "Do you think they really believed me?" "After you left," Renee rested her hand on the table. "Some did. Some still don't. That's not something you can always control. So what do? You keep showing up. That's the hard part, not just once, but over and over again. You speak the truth, even when it feels like no one hears it." Talia thought about that, like you did. Renee gave a soft smile. "Like I still do. Was it always this hard for you?" Renee leaned back in the chair, eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes harder, but I stopped waiting for it to get easy." Talia looked at her mother, not just as a parent now, but as a person, someone who had fought through walls she never even saw, someone who carried quiet power without needing a crowd to recognize it. "I used to wish you had a regular job," she said. "Like something easy to explain?" Renee laughed. I know, I could see it in your face when people asked, but now I think it's cool. Like really cool, Renee reached out and gently tucked one of her daughter's braids behind her ear. I'm proud of you, you know, she said. Not because of what you said in class, but because you said it anyway. Talia felt a warmth in her chest, not just pride, but relief. A weight she hadn't noticed until it started to lift. I didn't think you were going to come that day, she admitted. Renee raised an eyebrow. Why not? I thought maybe you'd think it wasn't worth it. Renee paused. Then she leaned in closer, her voice firm and steady. Anything that messes with how you see yourself? That's always worth showing up for. They didn't need to say much after that. Talia stood and walked over to the fridge, grabbed a magnet, and pinned her drawing right next to the grocery list. Renee watched her, heartful, but quiet. Not every lesson came with applause. Some just sat there, visible only to the people who'd earned them. But there was one last thing left to say, not for Talia, but for everyone else still learning what brilliance looks like. The next week, during morning announcements, Ms. Lawson did something unexpected. She held up a student submission from the Career Dreams bulletin board and read it out loud to the class. This one is from Talia Jefferson. She wrote, I want to build machines that go to places no person has ever been because someone has to figure out how to get us there, and I think I can. There was no laughter this time, just stillness. A few students turned to look at her, not with disbelief, but something closer to respect. Talia sat at her desk, calm, focused, drawing small gears in the margins of her notebook. She didn't need to look up. She didn't need the room to cheer. That wasn't the point, because this story was never about applause. It was about truth. About being sure of something when everyone else questions it, about what it means to speak boldly, not to be loud, but to be honest. The people in that classroom had seen something they weren't expecting. A woman with credentials, yes, but more than that, a woman who knew who she was, who didn't wait for permission to be heard, and a daughter who watched her walk into a room where belief had already left and still filled it with power. Renee never had to raise her voice. She never had to list her accomplishments. She showed up, and that was enough. But it was Talia who carried the weight of that day. She walked through the fire of ridicule, stood in it, and came out the other side taller. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is believe in yourself out loud, especially when no one else is clapping. And the lesson here isn't just about what job a parent has or how impressive their title sounds. The lesson is about what we teach our children, not with our mouths, but with our actions. When you believe in your child, you give them armor. When you show up for them, you give them courage. When you stand beside them, even for just a few minutes in a crowded room, you show them what being heard actually feels like. And when that happens, when a child feels seen, not just by a teacher or a classmate, but by the world, they stop shrinking themselves. They stop second-guessing. They start walking like they've got something important to say. Because they do, Talia didn't need to convince anyone anymore. She wasn't waiting for the class to believe her. She had already moved on, focused now on what she believed possible. That's what makes stories like hers matter, because for every kid who's laughed at, dismissed, or talked over, there's another moment waiting. When the door opens, when the badge flashes, when silence becomes respect, and it stays with them. At the end of the school year, when the class made their memory book, there was a page labeled Most Likely To. Beneath Talia's photo, a caption read, Most likely to launch something into space. She smiled, not at the sound of it, but because this time, they truly meant it. So, when a child shares something bold, don't rush to doubt. Don't limit them to your understanding. Let them grow beyond your expectations. Parents, show up even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it matters. Believe them out loud. Subscribe for more true-to-life stories that remind us of real strength.